So I was asked today by a new client, should I get a prenuptial agreement? And the first words out of my mouth were, well, maybe. It depends on what's going on in your life. Tell me about the assets. Tell me about when you're getting married. Tell me about what you've acquired. Tell me about what your future spouse has acquired prior to the time you guys decided you were going to get married and prior to the date you're going to get married. You see, in a premarital agreement or a prenup, or it's also called an ante-nuptial agreement, meaning before you get married, you probably have acquired some assets or some debts. Perhaps your future spouse has acquired some assets or debts. Do you want to make those joint? Do you want to keep them separate? Usually prenups come into play when people have acquired substantial assets. A recent case I did was we represented a widow who inherited, well, didn't inherit. Her husband who passed away had in excess of $1 million in life insurance that she received. Paid off a house, bought a brand new car, and invested the remaining funds and had substantial assets at that point. And 8 months later, she's dating a guy and they're talking about getting married. So, you know, we want to talk about the assets. Does future spouse, in that case, does her future husband, is he going to split that with her 50-50 if they get divorced? Well, the idea is no. They should keep that separate and distinct. Now, what about future income? What about income that they both earn going forward? Should that be joint? Should that be a marital asset? Should it be split 50-50? Or should it be different? In a prenuptial agreement, you can define how future income will be, whether your income will be yours, whether your future spouse's will be theirs, debt, etc. Who'll make the financial decisions? Will you keep everything separate, or will you join it up? If you join it up, who's going to make the decisions? Are you going to have joint bank accounts or separate accounts? And then what happens with those accounts? Also with debt, savings, credit cards. What about who's going to work and who's not going to work, right? And what's going to happen to the income? Who's going to pay for what bills? Or is there going to be one supporting the other? And then what about spousal support or alimony? These are all things you have to think about. If you get divorced at 6 months, would that be different than if you got divorced at 5 years? What about 10 years? What about 20 or 30? And what about fault? Meaning, what if somebody's cheating on the other spouse? Does that play a role in your prenuptial agreement? What about children? Do you want to prearrange a custody situation, or do you want to leave that up to courts in the future? What about inheritances and gifts from family? How are those going to be treated? And just keep in mind that if it's not discussed in the prenuptial agreement, then it's left to the divorce code. And here we're talking about the state of Utah. The divorce code in the state of Utah would and very well could have a completely different outcome depending on what you've done with that asset, whether you've commingled it or not. Also, taxes. Is there a prior tax debt that the one spouse has? How are you going to deal with future tax debt? What about education? Is someone going to go to college? Have they already gone to college? Professional degrees, things like that. Also, businesses play a huge role. Do you currently own or operate a business? Or if you start a business, who's going to own it? Who's going to operate it? How's that going to be divided up? And then what happens in the event of death or if someone gets disabled? How are the assets going to be accumulated or divided at that point? You see, there is a lot of things to think about in a prenuptial agreement. And if you have a question or concern about one, you ought to speak with an attorney. Now, I want to make it absolutely clear that if you don't do some certain things correctly, that it's possible that they will not be upheld. So when courts look at prenuptial agreements, if you don't, for example, have independent counsel for each person, if the spouses don't have separate attorneys that are not affiliated with each other, the courts can absolutely throw out those prenuptial agreements. If you do it on your own, you are very likely going to have trouble. If you need a prenup, chances are you need to do it correctly. Timing also plays a role. Are you doing this the day before you're getting married? Or are you doing it several months in advance because you're planning things? Also, keep in mind you have to do a complete and full disclosure of all of your assets and all of your debts. If you fail to disclose things, then those things are, then the court can then throw out that prenuptial agreement because it wasn't fair and it wasn't properly disclosed. So fairness is an issue that the court will look at. Look, these things can be very complicated, and they can also be very straightforward and simple. And quite frankly, you need to speak with an attorney about your specific situation when we go to prepare or do a prenuptial agreement. We do these all the time, and we focus on family law in our office. We want to help you. Give our office a call, 801-676-7308. Again, 801-676-7308. And I look forward to helping you with your prenuptial agreement. Thanks for watching.